Well, hello there.
I'm on mute. I'm just letting you know that now.
Okay.
Oh, hey everybody. This is Jeff Fuller with Fuller Embroidery Works. And we have Mr. Justin Armento from JA Digitizing Studios. And today we are going to be talking about editing designs. And one of the funnest things, well, I don't know if I necessarily call it fun, is when you get a file that is a machine file and you need to make an edit on it. So today we're going to be taking a DST file that has a couple of issues later to be identified. We're not going to give that away to you now. You have to watch to see that later. But we're going to take this DST file and we're going to work on trying to fix it, adjusting some things, and show you guys how you can do that within respective softwares.
Wilcom and Pulse.
Yeah, Justin agrees. He's the one with the show notes. I'm the one that just sits here and looks pretty. But before we get too far into that, we'll go ahead and check in with some of the people that are joining us. We have Barb LaFond watching from North Central Minnesota. Hello. We have Kingsbury Craft watching from Bremerton, Washington. We're just going to, I'm not going to. Yeah, there. From there. We have Suzanne Hill watching from Newport, Rhode Island. Hello. And we have Gina Butler watching from Oklahoma City. Hello as well. And we've got some chatter going back and forth in the comment section. So now that we've done that, let's talk about the embroidery nerd shirts. So if you guys haven't yet, you can jump over to shirt.theembroiderynerd.com, and we have our annual, I guess I would call it annual, our annual shirt sale going on where we are selling some of the shirts. And this is the last week. So does that close, Justin, on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Thursday?
It closes next Monday at midnight.
Next Monday. So it closes this Friday at midnight. And if you forget, you have until Monday at midnight to actually get your order in. But do this once a year. Justin's company, Aztec Embroidery in Tucson, Arizona, are the ones that print these for us, and they do a really good job. They've done our shirts for the last 2 years. Now, if you guys, this is a thing. If you got shirts from year 1 and year 2, you're definitely going to want to get year 3 so you can keep your collection complete, because we will not print the same design again.
Exactly.
Dun, dun, dun. I know I'm going to be ordering a bunch because I need to keep my collection complete. And actually, if you look in my closet, it's like 98% embroidery nerd t-shirts and 2% other t-shirts. So,
and
that way,
if you visit the store tomorrow, you will see
a mystery.
There's a bonus shirt that's going to be available.
A bonus shirt. Ooh, a mystery with a twist.
Yes. So check it out. Check it out. It'll be up for, like I said, almost another week next Monday. So get your embroidery nerd shirts.
There you go.
To answer everybody's question, it is a screen printed shirt, but it is a simulated embroidered design on the shirt. So,
you know, we actually had a question about this in the group, that somebody thought it was funny that we were trying to sell screen printed shirts to embroiderers. But I wage you this: have you ever tried to sell an embroidered shirt to an embroiderer?
Exactly.
Because if I can make it myself, I don't necessarily want to buy it.
Exactly.
Just make it myself. So we do have them screen printed. Number one, they're lighter and they're more comfortable. And number two, I'm not selling something to you that you can just easily make yourself. I'd rather get you guys something that you can't make yourself.
Although I'm sure we have plenty of screen printers in the group that are embroiderers as well. But yes, it is kind of have that angle of we're selling something that you can't do yourself if you're an embroiderer. So,
yeah,
or only an embroiderer.
There you go. All right. Well, we'll catch a couple more comments here. And we have Matthew saying, hey, everyone, I was going to be on today, but insert excuses 1 through 9 here. We actually accepted excuse 10, which isn't on the list. So we're just going to keep that there. We have Tina saying hello from Dayton, Tennessee. Hello. We have Mike Muldowney saying hello. Matt is lying. I will not sign. Actually, I will. If you show up to my house with a Sharpie and a shirt, I will sign it. I will do that. And we have Identity Threads Embroidery Company joining us on YouTube. So let's go over the last of announcements, I guess, is if you guys go to links.theembroiderynerd.com, and Justin's going to type that in the chat while I talk about it, you can find the links to all our social media to be able to follow us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, join the Facebook group, connect with us on Discord if you want to join the conversation. And we even have a link up there that says buy us a coffee. So if you guys ever wondered what keeps the infamous threadconverter.com up and running, it's buy us a coffee. So if you guys want to join us, you can check out the no, Matt. Then you can join the conversation there. So without further,
You know what, Matt? If you could throw up that link, I think I threw it up wrong.
links. Yeah, you did. I'll get it. So without further delay, there we go. That's the word I'm going to use. Justin's going to go ahead and start sharing his screen, and we will pull up the design that we'll be working on today.
Let me do that for you. Share screen. If I can figure this out, since I've done this so many times.
I bet you start with sharing your screen.
There you go. All right. So as embroiderers, I'm sure you've either been given a DST file or someone supplies it, or it's an old file that maybe was created in an older software that you don't have anymore as far as the native files are concerned. But there are times where you're going to have DSTs. So not only are these softwares perfect for digitizing from scratch, they're pretty powerful as far as editing software as well. So this is an older design that I know came my way that had some issues as far as a couple different things.
You zoom in on that a little, Justin?
Yeah, I'm going to zoom in here. So a couple different things were involved in this, and something I want to point out too. The saved palette that you're going to have in your software, like mine here down here, is just a standard palette. I usually have brighter colors as my default palette, just so I can have a lot of contrast when I'm digitizing. But when you're bringing in a DST file, it's going to come in as your default palette. So this may not be the colors involved in the actual design. Like if you're opening an EMB file, it is going to save that information as far as colors in the design. I know this is part of the Maryland flag, so I know this is like red and white. The text may be white, black, red, something like that. But that is something that I know that it has been a question a couple times when people open DST files. They're wondering why it's coming in all these kind of weird colors. So like I said, depending on what software you're opening it in, depending on what your default palette or your thread chart that you have set is gonna be opening in those colors, and it's basically gonna just follow your first needle, your second needle, and so on and so forth, the way your colors are set up in your palette. So a couple of the things that were an issue with this design that we're going to go through and kind of show the editing was they were getting a lot of separation between the fills, the two different colors of the fills. So the fills were pulling apart quite a bit and showing the the material show through in these areas. Another thing too was there were some rough spots in the text. You can see kind of some rough edges that are coming through this lettering as well, that we're going to go through and kind of show you how to adjust. Well, let me know if there's any questions there, Jeff, if you don't mind.
I will let you know if there's any questions.
All right, thanks.
No worries.
All right. So first off, there is a lot of times where you might get a DST file, and even though this may have been originally digitized in a way where the nodes are plotted in a more uniform way or the correct way, there are times, and honestly, I have not found any rhyme or reason as far as DST files being the most generic type of file that I would say most software and machines can read. At least most software can read as far as embroidery software. But there are times where you get a DST file and you're going to have an array of kind of weird issues where there's nodes that are out randomly out of place, too many nodes. This is just information that when it gets translated from that native file into a DST file, it's just this added chatter that you get sometimes. So coming in here, not only can I see that these fills have a barely overlap here, which is going to cause that separation when they sew, but there's also some kind of errant and kind of wonky nodes coming through here. So when you are in the reshape object setting, which is basically your node setting, you just click on the object you're looking to edit, go into that setting, and it's going to show all your nodes to that element. So typically when I'm editing a design, I kind of go through and try to clean up the areas that I see kind of errant information, just so I can be working with a smoother design here. So just kind of those edges that I saw all that weird chatter going through, I'm just cleaning up. And so since I can see that the first color sequence that's going to be sewing is the green, if you can see here in your color object list here in Wilcom, the green elements are going to be sewing first. So you know that those are going to be tucking up underneath the next elements, which are going to be the royal blue elements here. So selecting that fill there. Again, there's and if you're not familiar with Wilcom, the blue dots, those represent a curved node. The yellow squares represent a straight node. So when I am working with straight edges, I usually go through and just kind of delete the curved nodes. And if you select it and hit the space bar, you can actually change it from a curve to a straight or vice versa. But when I am working with edges that are straight, I just go through and kind of delete all those errant nodes. And that way I know I'm going to be working with just the straight edges of that element. So it's just a simple of, since I know that these two aren't overlapping enough, so you're going to have that separation when you get the pull of the fills, I'm just going to bring in those nodes and make sure that there's more of an overlap in these areas. So I have these kind of areas here too. I'll bring in down at the bottom here. And when you have a fill selected, you're going to have this line out here that has the two orange handles at the end. That's going to be actually your angle of your fill. So if you are having a problem with a design due to the angle of the fill, you can go ahead and use one of the ends, toggle that angle as well. And that'll change the angle of the fill. So I'm going to go back in. I kind of pulled in these areas underneath the blue. I'm going to come back to this side, delete the curve node, pull in these areas, and make sure that there's another curve node hiding there. And just make sure that those areas now are going to be sufficiently tucked up underneath the other fill. So when you do have that pull of the fill, it's not going to pull so much that it's going to kind of open up and show that gap between and show the material show through. So another thing I wanted to point out, if you were to digitize this shape in Wilcom, under your object properties, that's where it's going to have all your settings as far as your underlay, your density, and whatnot. Now, selecting your fill, you could actually go to your density and your stitch spacing, and then that's going to dictate that setting. But as far as the underlay, because DSTs get pulled in as separate elements, if I move this fill over here, you can see the underlay stitches here are its own actually separate element. As you can see here that it's even broken up into several elements. So that is one of the limitations as far as editing in Wilcom. Not all the settings you're going to find that you would find under a native file that's built in Wilcom. So you could usually select a element if you're digitizing in Wilcom, and everything about that you can change, and it's going to change it all uniformly throughout that element, underlay, pull compensation, and whatnot. So if it is something that you want to change as far as an underlay, you can add the underlay to that element. The option is still going to be there. So if I wanted to add, say, double tatami, say like this design's going on something that needs a little bit more underlay, like a towel or something like that, and I know that the underlay that's already in the DST isn't sufficient, so I want to add more underlay, then you can. But if you are trying to change the underlay for any reason, you want to change it to a different type of underlay, maybe add an edge walk or something like that, you could always just select all that area of that underlay that's kind of broken up and delete that. And that way now you're just left with that fill stitch, and you can control all those different factors and you're not worried about all those errant elements that are going on.
One random thing that I'm going to throw in here to add to that is when you do that, you need to make sure that you check your lock stitches and you set your lock stitches, because a lot of times those little segments that are set as manual stitches in his object sequence list there, those are the lock stitches, and they'll turn off the lock stitches for the object, and that can cause unraveling. And ask me how I know.
Yeah, absolutely right. Anytime because there are times where, and actually this is right here, if you can see it, that little bit here is probably the lock stitch. But if I were to go through there and delete all those little segments, and sometimes this is an example where it was kind of just underlay, fill, and that little lock stitch. There's times where you may select an object and there's all kinds of different things going on with it. You might get half the fill in one element and the other half of the fill in another element. It all depends on how that element is sewn. Like if this element was sewn where it kind of did a fill and then it walked over to another area and then it kind of filled back that direction, it would probably treat it as 3 different segments. It would have the first part of the fill, it would have the travel running stitch, and then they would have the second part of the fill. Luckily enough, this is all in one piece, so the element is just one. But yeah, if you do delete that and all that other information, you definitely want to treat it as this is an object that you did digitize. So you want to go in and add tie-in stitches, add lock stitches, and stuff like that. Otherwise, you will have some elements unraveling on you. So getting back to that, I think everything with this fill that I did, if I wanted to do underlay, change it to a regular tatami, maybe add a edge run underlay. That's something I normally do. I think I've tucked it in nicely under the second element that sews, which is the blue. And then going back to my color object list over here, I can see that once it sews the blue, it's going to sew the red. So those intersections here between the blue and red, I'm going to want to adjust that blue layer, because that's going to be the area that's going to be sewing up underneath the red section. So I'll go back to my node editing again. I'm going to delete these kind of errant curve nodes. So I am working with all straight areas. And here I want to just put up underneath the red again. So that's the only area here that crosses over these 2 colors. The other part is going to be down here.
Here we have a good question.
Yeah.
Identity Threads asks, speaking of lock stitches, how important is a start lock compared to an end lock? So I'll get your take on this, and then I'll throw my 2 cents in.
So as far as terminology, typically it's a tie-in at the beginning and a tie-out or a lock stitch at the end. A tie-in is going to make sure that you don't have any thread that's going to pull out, and then therefore you're going to have a thread break or the thread coming loose, giving you a thread break on your machine. That tie-in stitch in all different machines actually have a different way that the amount of stitches that it's going to do as far as the tie-in, the speed that it goes. You want to make sure that thread is catching the bobbin, getting secure before it starts sewing that element. So anytime that needle or that trim happens, or at the beginning of the design, you want that top thread locked in place before you proceed with the design. So, what were you saying, Jeff? Your take on it?
So, Jeff, remember that my file that the tie-ins were disabled when I first got my Happy? Share that story. So, Matt first got his Happy, and he was having problems with the thread pulling out from the needle. And when that happens, instantly people start looking at tension. You start looking at machine issues. It's as simple as not having a tie-in on the file. The thread is going to pull out of your needle. And you see it more on older machines, because newer machines, they've actually put in a processor in a lot of the newer machines that will look for lock stitches. And if it doesn't see any, it will actually apply a lock stitch on the tie-in or the tie off. And it's because of that. It can make you think that you have machine issues when you actually don't have machine issues. So as far as how important is the tie-in, it's going to stop your machine from the thread from pulling out of the needle. It's going to secure your bobbin before it takes off running as fast as it can. And likely when you have a thread break, it'll actually do a tie-in then too. Tie-offs, it's really important because it's going to stop the thread from coming undone. And if you do a really long lock, really wide satin, and you don't lock stitch at the end, you're going to get looping, which again makes you think, hey, I've got tension issues, because I had that issue on my machine where I chased it for 3 weeks trying to figure out why the hell it kept looping on this one file. And it turned out that it was just missing a lock stitch, or it wasn't necessarily missing. It was an inadequate number of stitches in the lock stitch. So it wasn't actually locking and it was coming undone, but it was leaving the last stitch was looping. And it took me forever to figure that out. And Matt says here that it was like 2 weeks going back and forth with TexMac, who is the distributor for Happy Machines, and me. He reset tensions, retimed it all. And granted, I never saw the machine run because people I bought it from didn't have power up in their warehouse, so we didn't know if it ever worked. But he was showing me a video of it running, and I watched, and it just was going. It didn't do a tie-in, and it just went. I said, I don't think you have lock stitches. And he was doing a tension test, and that's what it was, is he didn't have lock stitches. And so he thought it was, chasing down gremlins that can just actually be in a file. So
right.
Lock stitches are extremely important.
Especially on that wide satin. If there's no lock stitch, if you get it just right, you can grab that thread and just go, and it'll come right out of there.
You rub your finger across it, and all those stitches come out, and that stuff. There's two possibilities when that happens. Number one, it's going to come back to you, and they're going to say replace it. Number two, they're never going to come back to you for work to have done it again.
Right.
It's going to be one or the other. So lock stitches are extremely important, especially those tie outs. Tie-ins, like I said, some of the machine manufacturers are actually trying to have the machine insert them in when the machine starts. So the issues of not necessarily having them in there, I think that's on newer machines, it's a little bit less of an issue, but I think it's very good. Very good practice. Make sure that you have them in there and that they're adequate for what you're trying to do. It's one of the first things you should be learning when you go to digitize, but a lot of times it's jumped over because the software does it automatically for us.
Right, for sure. And there you can there is settings where you can set it where you can have a certain template, or you have a certain setting that is the default where it's going to lock every element or lock after every trim. It's good to have those settings because it's something where you can kind of set it and forget it, and then you can adjust it how you want it on an individual basis. That's kind of how I digitize. I have it set to lock or to tie in after every trim, to trim after either a color change or after a certain distance of a jump. And then if for any reason I want to toggle that on or off, I'll treat it on an individual basis and go in and change that setting. Jeff was talking here. I kind of manipulated this fill into two pieces because this is a lot of times where you see elements that are kind of done weirdly. And there are times where those two elements may come through as kind of slightly different angles. Just because, again, that transfer from your native to a DST. And I've even seen, it's kind of that game of telephone where if a file's been saved over and over and over in different softwares and different file formats, it can be completely a mess by the time it reaches your door. And
so I'm going to throw something else in here too, Justin, just because I'm having fun derailing you.
Okay.
When Justin opened this file in Wilcom, when you open the file, there's an option that you can input this and you can open it as stitches only, where you'll only get one color per object. Or you can have it to where it breaks it and it tries to turn it into outlines. And you opened it so it tried to break it into outlines.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm just throwing that out there.
Yes, correct. One quick trick you can use that if you are having two different fills that you really want it to be one piece and have the same angle, the same settings, and it's not, an array of weird stuff. As you can see, these two pieces that are just barely butting up against each other, you might, depending on the stitch angle and the way it sews, might have a gap in that area when you sew it. A quick little trick you can do is if you grab one of the segments and add some nodes and make sure that those two segments overlap, especially where they meet at the edges. And if you select those two segments, you could actually go to your weld tool. And I think that's under arrange.
I have it as a button on my screen.
Yeah, I have it as a button, but I always like to kind of go through and I thought it was under arrange.
Fired.
Shaping, yes. It's under shaping. If you weld those two together, if you have them both selected, that'll actually turn them into another solid object. So that's a quick little editing hack that I like using, especially when you're having two different fills that may, meet at weird positions, and you have that kind of weird line going through your fill where it should be solid. So so as far as those fills up here, I didn't go through and change any angles or anything like that. I do see an area that's kind of weird up here in the underlay. I can kind of see that it's bulging out. So just selecting that underlay, I'm going to pull those stitches down and make sure that there's nothing protruding out there. Now you have that area. That's not an issue. Text. I think text has got to be the worst scenario bringing a DST into your editing software. It seems like the more a letter is pathed in a certain way, where it does a section, walks over to another section, does that section, it's giving the file more and more information for it to be not necessarily corrupt in that it's not going to work, but it's adding a lot of information to that stitch file. So kind of coming in here, you might have some kind of weird areas where underlay has some extra stitches. And if you are, especially with smaller text, if you are having areas where you're having these weird bulges or even having just your underlay sticking out in areas, again, because you can't just grab that satin stitch, change the underlay setting on it, it's going to treat it all as individual pieces. A lot of times you'll have to go through here and and delete those underlay stitches, and which is going to cause you to have to go through and kind of look at your pathing and make sure that you add your running or manual stitches to make sure that it is going to be pathed right as far as where it's going to start and in jumping from element to element. If you aren't having any issues with the underlay and it's just maybe some shapes or some densities or something like that, leave the underlay alone. Then you don't have to worry about repathing or adding your own manual underlay. Looking at the wireframe of this, as you can see, the shape of the E should have, the open ends facing to the right here. But if you do grab that object, you can kind of see these ghost nodes out here when it shows the wireframe of what this DST information has. I like going through here and kind of deleting those nodes because there are times where if you apply a different density or you change the element in any way, it sometimes will take those ghost nodes and apply those stitches to it for whatever reason. Sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does. So if you can identify, you turn your wireframe on, you can kind of see these errant nodes out there. If you're not changing anything, more than likely it's not going to fill in. If you change the size of something, I've seen that's where it most of the time will fill in those areas. Let me try to see if I can force that to happen. So as you can see here, there's this errant node out here. Even though the satin stitch ends at the top where it should, there's this errant node. So if you scale it up, see how it started adding stitches to that out here? Because it's the software is finding those nodes and that shape that's built, and it wants to add those stitches to that area as soon as it regenerates the stitches. So that's something definitely needs to be addressed when you're coming through and trying to edit those. So I either delete them if I know they're extra, or if this is just kind of a weird angle, I just bring it into where it needs to be. And if I do that before I make any changes as far as density or anything like that, I know that there's not going to be any area that's going to fill in weird. Like if there were some errant nodes that were coming into the middle of this A and I regenerated it and actually filled in stitches, now that A center is going to be filled in with stitches because it is going to have that weird section onto it. So basically coming through here, the lettering, even though, like I said, it was probably digitized correctly where you had nice 90-degree angles and whatnot, these nodes have now kind of gotten to weird positions. Angles have gotten to weird positions. So again, in your reshape object menu, if you just select the individual objects, you can manipulate the nodes, change angles, add nodes if you want to. You right click to add curve nodes, left click to add straight nodes.
Select and space bar to switch them.
Just like that.
Bam.
And if there are areas, once this is shown, that you are seeing that the push and pull comp is something that you need to address. Let's just say, for instance, these letters had too much push comp, so they were stopping too short. So when you sewed this out, the D and the E looked taller than the P and the A because the bottom of the P and the A weren't dropping enough, say. I like coming through and adding a guideline, and that way I know I'm going to be, I'm splitting the difference here. If you can see that the push comp here, this satin is digitized short as far as the bottom of the E, where the rest of those letters are going to be ending at the bottom because those are going to pull in. I usually set a guide to where I want to make that change to, and that way each individual letter that I'm addressing, I could just bring it right down to that guideline, and I have it set to snap to guidelines. And that is something easy to adjust. And you could even do a guideline for the areas where you don't have the push, just to make sure that everything's going to be evenly across. And that way you can kind of adjust all those letters. But again, if you are having problems with underlays, you can go in and individually select them, take them out, but you are going to have to address travel stitches, underlay stitches, and or tie in and tie off stitches. So so you ready to attack this in Pulse there, Jeffrey?
Ready as I'll ever be.
All right.
Share window, that one. And we'll go ahead and bring it up. And then I wonder, see if this works. If it did, it'd be really cool. If it doesn't, well, then that's about what I expect for today. It's definitely one of those days, but all right. So you guys can see my screen, and obviously that didn't. Okay, that didn't work. I was trying to bring on my little pointer focus thing to put a circle around my mouse, but that did not decide to do that today. So as you guys can see, the generation here is a little bit different than it did it in Wilcom. But it's kind of the same things. We've got our needles coming across here off of color changes. So, you know, for instance, this could be white and this could be white. That's essentially what is on the run sheet that accompanies the original file. They don't have, but generally when you get a DST file, you're going to get a run sheet that tells you the sequence over here of what sews first, what sews second. And I can go in, and this actually, when it brings it in, it brings it in as stitch segments. And I don't think you can read that, but it says stitch segment over there. And to actually convert it to outlines, like what Wilcom attempted to do, is I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to process, and I'm going to say I can do stitches to artwork, stitches to artwork split, or stitches to outline. I'm going to click on stitches to outline. And this is actually a really good example of what Justin was talking about earlier, is if I turn off my 3D view, how well can you see that? So if I hide the unselected segments, you can see there that that portion is actually missing. So we're going to show all segments, and it broke it up into 3 different fills here. I want to say it's those 3. We'll find out. So if I hide the other ones, yep, you can see almost. Let's pull up one more here. That one, I'm pretty sure. We'll just grab all of these for fun. And I will hide the others. And as you can see, it broke them into different layers based off of where they were located at. And that's based off of how this file sews. So when it sews, it goes, and I'm just going to drag this across here. It's going to do stitches from that side, come over and fill that upper piece, and then it's going to come back. And so what it's doing is it's seeing all those as individual sections that need to be their own objects. Now, if this sewed from this point to this point without any stops, and we took that little corner out, when we go to convert this to outlines, it would convert that entire object as one outline. And it's just based off of how it's reading it and how it sews. So let's turn on our 3D view here, and I'm just going to run through how it sews. As you can see, it does the blue, and then it comes and does the red, and then it comes and does what we have as green, and then it's going to kind of do this cross and go across the text. So the process is fairly similar to what Justin did. It's just going to be a little bit more of it, and that's because of the different sections that it broke it into. So if we grab here, we can go into the node edit view, and we can come in and we can actually select a bunch of these nodes, kind of like what Justin did, and we can delete them. I'm just going to undo that change there. But really what I want to do is I want to grab these ones here, and I want to pull them down. And there we go. I'll do it. And I'm going to delete a couple of them. And we're just going to bring it down underneath that fill a little bit more. Now, depending on, how badly you want this to be to work more like a native file, the more time you're going to put into editing it. So if I really wanted this to be a native file, I would put a lot of time into making sure that I pull everything, I convert everything into one object. I'd probably redraw some of these objects. But if you're just trying to do like a quick edit to where you can get your objects taken care of and you can bring everything down and fix just tiny issues here and there, then it's going to be better if you do that over the long run. And you can see this kind of generated a gap right there. So I'm going to grab this node and I'm just going to bring it over a little bit and hit G because I want to make sure that I'm not getting any gaps in there. And this is what Justin was talking about earlier when there were the gaps, when he talked about how you could get gaps. And this is how that works. I've got...
And this is where also too, when you have a DST file given to you and you have these adjustments you may make, especially if you have digitizing software in-house and you know how to digitize, a lot of times you got to look at how much is messed up or how much that DST file has all these different elements that you have to go and track down and adjust and whatnot. It may just be quicker just to redigitize this fill with the proper overlaps. So.
Yep, and it really comes down to that, how much time do you want to put into it? Is it going to be faster to redigitize it? And, when you're digitizing something like this, it's very quick. It's basically I'm going to come under that one a little bit. I'm going to come up to there. Come down to there. Make sure I'm overlapping everything. And I could even come down if I wanted to. I guess I could add that piece in there too, huh, Justin?
Yeah, because you got that overlap in the center there.
Come there.
So yeah, definitely. There are different levels of different softwares too that you may only have a level that does editing. So you may not have that option to actually have any digitizing function. Or say if you're sending it to a digitizer, then you may have to incur some cost if it is something that they have to take some time editing or redigitizing. So that's why I'm always wary about when people say they have a DST file. It's just a disclaimer that we always give people. A lot of quality has to do with the digitizing and how well it's digitized, and if it's digitized properly for the garments that they're ordering, or just digitized properly in general. So that is something that you may or may not know if that file is going to work, and so with quality. So,
yep. And so you saw how I was just able to quickly redraw that object. Then it was just a matter of resequencing it and deleting all the others. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you're checking, my fill density here is at 0.4. It states it there. It also has my fills up here. I've got my start lock and my end lock because we were talking about the lock stitches earlier. So I can set my end lock. I can set my trim. My start lock is not necessarily going to have one because it's going to run off of this object here. And then it's just going to continue to move on. So just making sure that we're getting all of our values set to the way that we want them or need them. I'm also going to add a contour, and let's go with the lattice underlay to make sure that I'm stabilizing the material properly.
One thing I'm seeing in Pulse that is kind of a neat feature that Wilcom doesn't have, but as you can see, Jeff has that blue fill selected. So it actually brings it to the forefront as far as your view, so you can see all those edges. With Wilcom, if you are in the true view view to it, the 3D look to it, it's gonna show the true overlaps of the entire design. So you would have to kind of zoom in, take the true view off to see those outlines or the wireframe to see where those elements overlap. So that's kind of a cool feature where you can just select an object as long as you're in that 3D view, and it'll kind of make that element pop out so you can see all those edges to it.
Yep. And here's the underlay of the set object. where you can see the digitizer did a universal underlay, and you can see that it also grabbed the underlay when it converted it and added it to the sections as part of this run stitch. But, you know, it goes back into how much time do I really want to spend editing that when I can just let it go. Okay, well, it can just run that a little extra underlay. It's only, you know, maybe 50, 60 stitches. It's not really going to be that big of a deal.
Right.
And I can get my overlaps correct and move on. So the next part of that, I guess, we'll move down to the text, which I'm not going to lie, this text drives me nuts just a little bit more than it probably should. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a line here along the bottom and go there so that I can actually see, and I want to move that down just a little bit to bring it down closer to the line, to line up those stitches, because I want to fix these. I want to fix the corners, and in order to fix the corners, I need to see where they're at. So I'll go ahead and drop that line there, and now I can see all of the corners that are set. I'm going to grab this letter here, and we'll just, yep, grab the letter there, and it has this, it has a ghost stitch in there. So this is actually from where it's going to start running from the center. So it's got the series of jump codes in there to indicate that the machine head is traveling. So when I actually go through and I process stitches to outline, that's going to kind of move away. And now you can see I've got what looks like I've got a center run underlay there, and then I have the stitch segment there. So I can do the same thing that Justin did. I can delete that stitch object, and now I can actually look at the outlines here, and I can go into my node edit, and I can give it kind of, I can change the values. Now you can see that it does do, I'm going to say this wrong because I always say it wrong, Bezier curves. Did I get that right?
Yeah, Bezier.
No, I didn't get it right. Yeah, I know. We're just going to drop another line right there, because when I start editing these curve lines, it's going to change where that sits. And I want to make sure that I'm not changing the kind of the profile of the letter, I guess. I need to change the corners, but not necessarily how it sits there. So I can just go here. I can right click and I can say add an anchor point, and it'll give me that. And I can move that up there to the top. I can turn it to a cusp node, convert to cusp. And now I've got my little handles. That's what we call them, right, Justin? The little handle thingies.
Yeah, handlebars, whatever you want to call them. Bezier handles.
Yep. And I can essentially just adjust that letter there. I've got my beads here. So in Pulse, these beads, these are your stitch angles here. These little red dots are the nodes. My green circle is my start point, and my red triangle is my stop point. And so I'm just going to grab here, bring that node to that corner, and now that looks good. That's just going to annoy me a little bit, so I'm going to pull that up there just a little bit and maybe bring this down. This is one of those things where if you're really, what do you call it, Justin? When you're really anal, I didn't want to use that word, but you could very much spend
if you're very precise.
There you go. You could spend a lot of time editing and nudging nodes and tweaking stitch angles, and just making small fine adjustments to get it so that it looks just perfect to you. And then you'll put it on the machine, and it actually won't make any difference when you get it there, because it's going to be too small of an adjustment to actually notice. So that's one of the things that we have to make sure of when we're looking at this stuff, is that we're thinking about it in a way that it is, we have to remember the scale that we're working on and the size of the letters. So I've got that. I'm just going to look over here, and I've got my satin path. Let's go ahead and check my underlay here. That's not my underlay. We'll get there. It's been a day. There we go, underlay. And I don't want to add a parallel underlay. I want to go with a center run underlay. because that's what was there before, and the center run worked very well. Now, as you can see, we've got our E, so we're going to select our stitches here. We've got a little bit of a line there, which is probably going to be the last stitch, and then it's going to come over and it's going to do this fun little run stitch there, and then it'll do the short piece, underlay, and the satin over the top. So if I just go back into it and we start deleting the underlay, you can see here that it definitely changed this object here. And so to fix this, I actually need to come in here and I need to adjust these angle lines here.
So that's a good example of how the information, as far as, you know, just deleting one segment, the way Pulse was breaking this up, it actually had probably part of that lock stitch of the D tied into the underlay. That was the next element. So that's another thing too. You got to make sure that, you know, if you think you're only simply deleting some underlay stitches, it's not attached to another element that you want to keep.
Yep. And I'm just going to overlap some of these angles here and get some stitches to drop in there. And I grab the outline. Don't do that, Justin. I moved the letter too. It's definitely Tuesday. Now, the other thing I need to notice there too is that it took away the end lock stitch. So I need to add in that I want a lock stitch there at the end. And it took out the trim command. So I want to make sure that I also insert back in a trim command so that it does trim the letter before it moves on. Now you can see here with this object that it actually changed the shape of that object completely. So I've got my node over there that I want to bring up and under. And then I'm going to move my stop point just a little bit so I can get to the node underneath it. And I'm going to move my node there as well. And I can go ahead and bring my stop point back down. And now I'm going to edit the outside edge of these letters here, which, as you can see, it added in some fun little nodes there that I'm just going to pull out. I took a little too much. So we'll select that node and delete it. Doesn't want me to delete that node, apparently. We'll just move it. Move the stitch angle. Bring that node up too. And now I can kind of readjust that stitch angle there so that it flows. And now with the two objects, I can actually come here and I can combine them as a single shape. And now it's going to basically, it's kind of like pathing it or branching it. It's going to treat all of it as one object when it goes and does the underlay. Get that node, go in and node edit. That might actually make a difference. There we go. I'm going to delete that point. We'll delete this point down here. And then I can just make some adjustments on these other points to just kind of clean this object up a little bit.
And the majority of the editing, like Jeff and I are using, is going to be your node editing. I think that's when you have the most control over the whole segment to make things, you know, straight, and using your stitch angles to correcting some things. But if really needed to, in fine tuning, if it is something where you can't just grab a node and delete a few nodes here and there, that, you know, even manual stitches, if you every time you delete a node, you're actually deleting a needle penetration and a stitch. But you could actually fine tune it and get into stitch editing mode, and you can grab every individual stitch in both these softwares, and you can move a stitch here and there if you absolutely needed to. But like Jeff was saying earlier, some of the stuff is so minute that grabbing a stitch here and there isn't really going to change anything as far as what you can change in your node editing.
Yep. And see, now I'm just being overly
precise.
Precise. I'm being precise.
Yes.
As it needs to be dubbed. I'm being precise about how the corners look, because our eyes, when we look at text, it's going to be drawn to things like, is that line straight? Is that a proper corner? Is that going to, do the inside corners look okay? Those are the things that our eyes are going to be drawn to when we actually go and
you may have, like, if you're looking at that P in the top left corner of the P, how the DST brought it in. It is kind of weird. It probably has a couple of extra nodes in that and kind of curves off. But if you're looking at it sewn at say 5 millimeters tall, 99% of the time you're not going to see that variation of that angle. But taking that same letter at 1 inch tall, you're going to see that corner is in a nice sharp corner, and you kind of have a rounded corner because there's going to be more stitches involved at that larger size to make that kind of weird shape than there is in the smaller lettering. So you can get away with less precision on smaller lettering, I guess, than larger lettering.
Yeah. And one thing to note too on it, your mileage is really going to vary based off the software that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
On how smooth it will look. We all know that our pentographs have a resolution, and if you don't, I'm here to tell you that your pentograph has a resolution of how accurate it can be. And Pulse, actually, when it displays the generated stitches, it does so at the resolution of what pentographs are. So if I draw a straight line, the stitches might not plot across a straight line, because it's going to be plotting at the resolution of the pentograph. So it's really important to understand that in your software. If you're looking at, why is my line not that smooth? It could just be that it's going to render at the pentograph resolution. And you see that more when you bring a DST in, is your letters aren't necessarily as smooth. And that's because it's the actual stitch points that you get after the software renders it out at the resolution of your pentograph.
Right. Nicely said.
I hope so, because that was a lot of talking, and I don't know if I got my point across. But
I don't know if anybody has any questions. I've been monitoring the chat here, and it doesn't look like anybody has any questions. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but yeah, sometimes if you have a file, you can get away with a little bit of tweaking here and there, a little bit of editing, adding some densities and whatnot, and you can use the file and it'll work just fine. There's other times where it's a pretty bad file, and you're probably best to just go ahead and have it redigitized by your favorite digitizer, or if you digitize yourself. That way you have an AOA file that every time you run it, it's going to run efficiently, it's going to run without any issues, it's going to run with quality.
Yep. And to the stitch engine, they update stitch engines to get to where they can plot stitches faster and more efficient, and you're going to be gaining the benefits off of that as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. And as you can see, I lost my lock stitch there, so I'm going to grab my P and only the P, and then I can go into commands, and I can set that I want a trim command there at the end, and I can go in and I can set my lock stitch. And what did it do? It as a satin path. Let's see if I can remember where it's at, because normally it shows it up here when you select an object, and it's not showing it up there at this point. So I have to remember where it's at here on the side. That might take me a little bit.
It's gone.
It's gone. I lost it. I know it's not under compensation. I'm positive it's not under underlay. I would have thought it would have been under commands here, because you could set your lock stitch as well. Connections. There we go. Lock stitches. End lock is going to be I'll do a line. We should do that one day. We should go over the differences between all the different lock stitches and what their advantages and disadvantages are. As you can see, if I we'll grab this letter here. Maybe. Did I get him? Yep, I got him. and it didn't show me everything up there, but that's okay because I found it under connectors here. So if you see here our lock stitches, there are actually quite a few different lock stitches, and they can each be beneficial in different ways. The way I was taught it, and I like to remember it the best, is the best lock stitch is the one that you don't see that works.
Mhm.
Oh, but I'll go ahead and stop showing on my screen here. And I don't see any other questions in there. So I'll just go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and we can talk a little bit as we close out because we are up on the hour. Again, the announcements is we are this is the last week that you can get your embroidery nerd shirt orders in. If you guys are waiting, you're gonna miss out because I guarantee you're gonna do what I do, and you're gonna put it off to the last possible moment. And remember, shortly after there, it's closed. So if you go to shirt.theembroiderynerd.com, you can see the shirts there. And Justin is going to be putting up some extra spicy candy on there tomorrow. So I'd highly recommend checking that to see what he puts up. If you guys want to follow us on any of the social medias, you can go to links.embnerd.com. And there you can find links to the Facebook group, the Facebook page, YouTube channel, Discord if you want to join the conversation, as well as the Buy Us Coffee link, which goes to the hosting of the threadconverter.com, which if you guys haven't used it, it is fantastic if you're trying to match thread colors.
It is fantastic. I use it on a daily basis.
I use it on a daily basis too. But we should do that. That should be next week's episode, is Matt showing off all of the features of threadconverter.com.
That sounds good to me.
He's not here to say no, so we'll just throw him under the bus. But I don't know if you have anything else you want to throw in there, Justin.
Nope, just hit up that store, get your embroidery nerd t-shirt before the store closes next Monday, and we will see you all next Tuesday.
All right, that sounds like a plan. I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works. That is Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios. We're both here representing the Embroidery Nerd, and we will catch you guys next time.
Good night, everybody.